Hey there, Alex Kidman here again, and today I'm taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy A54. So this is part of Samsung's A series of phones. They're more their mid-range priced phones here in Australia. Samsung does not really do cheap phones in Australia anymore. So this is a $699 handset, and it sits at the top of Samsung's A series category, or you could maybe argue it sits at the very, very bottom of the S series. Samsung would not make that distinction, but I might, because at $699, it is quite a bit more expensive than the other current A series phones that you can buy. So is it worth it? Well, let's take a look. But before we do, I just want to say thanks to everyone who's subscribed recently and remind everyone who hasn't to hit that subscribe button. YouTube is a cruel mistress like this. So in design terms, you can definitely see the Samsung DNA in this phone. It looks an awful lot like, in fact, their S-series phones, their current S-series phones, that is. Here in Australia, we only see the A54 in two colours, though. So you've got the awesome graphite version that I'm holding here, or the awesome violet. Awesome is obviously their prefix of choice this year. There are other colours in other markets, so you might see them differently depending on where on the planet you are. But here, we just get the two. That's fine, beats having only one colour. This is a 6.4-inch Super AMOLED screen phone, reasonably large in the hand, but not huge, of course. And my one complaint here is that it is quite slippery. So if you put this down on a non-flat surface, or if you're not holding it just right, yeah, it's pretty easy for it to slip out of your hand. I've had it bumped down a couple of times now. It's survived all of those bumps, and that's good, but it's a little bit nerve-wracking. I would still suggest that a case would be a really, really good idea. One thing that I think is a really good idea that Samsung has incorporated that you don't see in phones at this price bracket all that often is proper IP-rated water resistance. Now, this does not mean that you can jump straight into a pool with this phone. This doesn't mean you can go surfing with it. But if it just falls in water, it should survive. It's always worth checking the warranty on these things if disaster does strike. But basic immersion and certainly a bit of rain and so on should not stress this. You don't typically see that in too many sub-$800 phones, really. Apart from being a bit slippery in the hand, though, this is quite a nice phone to use. I mean, controls are quite basic, power and volume at the side. There's no Bixby button, thankfully, and unlocking is handled via a biometric in-display fingerprint reader. During my review process, I've really had no problem with it unlocking, although that's without a screen protector in place. And again, given how slippery this phone is, I'd probably try and throw one on there, but I'm aware doing so may impact the biometric screen reader and whether or not it actually works for you. So on the camera front, you've got a trail of lenses. Again, this all looks very much like the S-series phones, but predictably, they are lesser lenses. So at the back, you've got a wide 50 megapixel, ultra-wide 12 megapixel, and 5 megapixel macro lens. It's an okay recipe, as is the 32 megapixel front-facing selfie camera. But just because it's okay doesn't mean it shoots brilliantly. Now, look, the reality in 2023 is that a mid-range and even a budget phone should be able to take daytime shots, simple shots, without really too much fuss at all. You only really need those high-end phones if you really want to take more complex photography. And for the most part, yeah, look, the A54 shot well, with a couple of minor exceptions. So the macro lens is not spectacular, and I really, really wish Samsung had gone for a telephoto here. Even like a 2x telephoto would have made a big difference, because digital zoom on this thing really, really quickly drops out the quality, looks awful, frankly, just not worth doing. If you can get closer to your subject, you'll just get a better shot, or crop in post-processing is my advice there. The other big issue that I had with the A54, and this is kind of common across a lot of phones, is that the post-processing that it does tends to really oversaturate the colours. They look just that little bit too unnatural to me. Now, again, you can fix for this, you can adjust for this, but by default, most people want to pick up their phone, take a photo and be done with it. And if you do that, you're going to end up with these slightly unnaturally bright photos. Now, again, some people love that. If that's you, if you like that kind of HDR to hell kind of thing, fine, go for it. You'll have a reasonable sort of time at a reasonable price, but this is not a great camera phone in that respect. On the performance front, this is running off a Samsung Exynos 1380 processor with 6GB of RAM and 128GB of onboard storage. MicroSD expansion is supported. I always like seeing that. So Samsung's Exynos processors have always tended to lag behind Qualcomm. And here in Australia, for the longest time, the Galaxy S series phones we got were all the Exynos variants rather than the Qualcomm. That's not the case anymore, but it is for the A series phones. What you get in performance terms is fairly reasonable, actually, for this kind of mid-range phone. It's not blow you out of the water fast, but it's not really going to lag in any real way. Gaming is fine, basic applications are fine. It all works reasonably well enough. It's also, of course, 5G capable, although predictably it's only sub 6 because only Google seems to care about millimeter wave. Not that I would expect, to be honest with you, Samsung to break that on an A series phone. It's going to do that on an S series phone at some stage, I hope. Samsung, if you're listening. In terms of battery life, the Galaxy A54 has a 5,000 milliamp hour sealed battery. And look, that 5,000 number sounds big, but frankly, it's kind of average. It's pretty much, outside foldables and Apple phones, pretty much what you should expect out of a mid-range phone and even a budget phone these days. That's not a big part. What's really interesting here is how well it manages the battery, especially considering its AMOLED screen can handle up to 120 Hz refresh rates, because that's typically a big battery killer. Now, Samsung phones, in my experience, in my testing, haven't always been the best performers of late, certainly not right up there. And look, honestly, the A54 does not change that expectation much, although it is better than the A53 was. To give that a little bit of comparative weighting, I ran a 1-hour YouTube video test on this phone from 100% battery just to see where its battery would end up, and it chewed through about 5% of the battery. Comparatively speaking, the A53, which this replaces, chewed through 7% in the same test. So it's actually a slightly more efficient part. Certainly a day of average use should be doable, but you can get phones that can do even longer than that. This is good, but not great, if you follow me. When it comes time to recharge the Galaxy A54, you'll be doing that via USB cable only. Now, the model that Samsung has loaned me here in Australia, literally, they loaned me the phone. They loaned me nothing else. As far as I can see, it comes with a charging cable, but no actual charger. Just the cable, not the plug, in other words. That certainly seems to be the case in overseas markets. It's not terribly clear from Samsung's website in Australia whether or not there's a plug in there, but I doubt it. If you want wireless charging, by the way, you're plumb out of luck. You can get some phones in this price bracket with wireless charging, but it is very rare to see, to be fair. So should you buy the Galaxy A54? Well, look, Samsung is one of Australia's best-selling phone brands with plenty of loyal customers. Now, I can't entirely see the sense, even though, for example, the battery life is a bit better, in upgrading to the A54 if you've got an A53. But if you're coming from a much older Samsung phone and you want to stay within that Samsung ecosystem, yeah, this is fairly decent value. There is a lot of competition in this space, though, and I do wish that the colour intensity on those camera shots wasn't quite so vivid. So here in Australia, it'll run you about $699, and for that kind of money, you do have a few other options. You can look at phones like the Motorola Edge 30. You might be able to grab a Pixel 7 cheap for that. Certainly, older Galaxy S phones can be had for that kind of money. So like an S21 or S22 could be had. And you could opt for the Google Pixel 6a, although we do know the 7a is coming pretty soon, so I'd be wary on that front. And if you did want to stick to the Apple side of the fence, but you're just thinking, oh, I want something a little bit cheaper, you'd have to look at something like the iPhone SE, where the battery life is much worse, but the performance is better, or something like an Apple iPhone 12 refurbished might be able to be had for that kind of price. Anyway, that's my take on the Samsung Galaxy A54. Got any thoughts, anything you want to know? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching all the way through to the end. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe.